Prosecutors have stated that Diddy deserves at least 11 years behind bars in their sentencing memo. Diddy is sentenced on Friday. Let's take a look at everything that they have discussed, most of the pertinent points, in this sentencing memo. The prosecution state that Diddy's crimes of conviction are serious and have warranted sentences over 10 years in multiple cases for defendants who, like Sean Combs, engaged in violence and put others in fear. Consistent with those cases and based on the corroborated evidence presented at trial, this court should impose a sentence of no less than 135 months imprisonment. They say that a substantial term of imprisonment is also needed in this case because the defendant is unrepentant. They state that the defendant, Diddy, tries to recast decades of abuse as simply the function of mutually toxic relationships, but there is nothing mutual about a relationship where one person holds all the power and the other ends up bloodied and bruised. They also talk about Cassie and how she still has nightmares. Cassie also read a letter to the judge. I'll be reviewing that in another video. They also say that the defendant's abuse drove Cassie to thoughts of taking her own life. Defendants who perpetrate violations of the Mann Act involving such violence and fear regularly face significant penalties. The defendant should be no exception, particularly when his history and characteristics demonstrate years of abuse and violence. Given the seriousness and duration of the offence conduct, as well as his decades of unchecked violence, consideration of the relevant factors weighs heavily in favour of a substantial sentence as well as a statutory maximum fine. The prosecutors state that the sentence imposed on the defendant, Diddy, should reflect the substantial psychological, emotional, and physical damage he has inflicted. Most significantly, the nature and seriousness of the offence, the need for deterrence and to promote respect for the law, and the history and characteristics of the defendant warrant a sentence of no less than 135 months imprisonment. They also respond to the defendant's argument, saying that the conditions of the MDC do not warrant a lenient sentence. They also state that the defendant's psychiatric evaluations are unreliable and do not warrant a lenient sentence. They state that while it appears that the doctors were provided with Cassie Ventura and Jane's testimony, it does not appear that they were provided with any other testimony in the case, including testimony regarding incidents of violence and SA involving other trial witnesses. Moreover, they were provided with only a couple dozen pages of Ventura and the defendant's vast text communications. The experts provided to the doctors appear to be blatantly self-serving, such as a handful of explicit communications from Cassie Ventura to the defendant, cherry-picked out of thousands of pages of their communications. They also said that the defendant's personal circumstances do not warrant a lenient sentence. The court can and should consider these facts under Section 3553A factors. However, the defendant must also be held to account for the fact that he used that same wealth and power to enable his crimes, to fly workers on hundreds of occasions, to keep Ventura and Jane under the influence of substances for days at a time, and to leverage his resources to threaten his victims. Further, although many defendants come before sentencing courts with compelling mitigating factors, contextualizing why they turn to crime, the defendant has enjoyed a remarkable life of privilege. He disclaims a history of abuse or neglect as a child and has had the full support of family throughout his life. Yet despite this, the defendant nevertheless engaged in abusive conduct for over a decade. And finally, as a result of all this, the prosecutors said that the court should impose the maximum financial penalties to reflect the seriousness of the offence. In addition to the sentence of at least 135 months imprisonment, the government respectfully requests that the court impose a fine of $500,000, the maximum fine allowable under the statute. A significant fine is needed to deter the defendant from future criminal conduct and to reflect the seriousness of the defendant's offences. Such a fine is also needed to provide just punishment. It's particularly fitting here, the prosecutors state, since the defendant's access to wealth enabled his crimes. It was used to transport and pay for workers, obtain substances, and pay for his vast staff to serve his every need. Diddy's sentencing is on Friday, and I'll keep you updated on everything that happens. But as always, let me know what you think in the comments below.